We need proper regulation today more than yesterday.
Yes.
Because we are in a massive crisis.
Yes.
We need crisis-sensitive journalism in this country. You don't need voice-cut journalism.
The media landscape has changed a lot in the past 20 years, and it has changed so much with the digitization process. And, with citizen journalism becoming really the decisive thing today, but along with that great freedom should come great responsibility.
If you start targeting individuals for opinions they hold, then we are going into a very scary, very, very scary situation.
Hi everyone and welcome once again to another episode of our interview series, Shared Values, partnering with Reshape Europe and the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom Sri Lanka office in partnership with EconomyNext is proud to bring you this series where we look at common norms between the European Union and Sri Lanka and where we can leverage on those common norms and values to create a more prosperous and better country post this current crisis period. And today we are looking at something very close to my heart as well, which is best practices in media regulation. And I'm delighted to have three friends who are going to talk to you about where we are in terms of media regulation, where we want to be, and how we can take the values in regions that champion democracy and good governance like the EU, and how we can build on that. I'm delighted to welcome three eminent personalities in this field, done quite a lot of groundwork over the last couple of decades, and hopefully will be part of the conversation going forward as well. First, I have Ranga Kalansooriya, very well-known figure in Sri Lanka, advisor to international media support in the APAC region, but known for a lot of the work he did as the CEO of Director General at that time, the Sri Lanka Press Institute, and also for a while the Director General of Government Information as well, a trainer, and has done a lot of work in this region. Next, we have Dilrukshi Handunnetti, who is the Executive Director for the Center for Investigative Reporting in Sri Lanka, a veteran of the media industry, a trainer in this region as well, imparting a lot of values to the next generation of journalists, while continuing to engage in the profession that's quite close to her heart. A different personality, but very much involved with our industry. Bhavani Fonseka is a senior researcher at the Center for Policy Alternatives, involved with a lot of policy matters, and I think has a very interesting perspective as well. So I want to start off with you, Ranga. Just very briefly, just give us an overview of the media regulatory regime in Sri Lanka.
To summarize in one word, it's in a chaos actually. So we have, if you take the mainstream, we have a proper or somewhat regulation only for print. You also involved in one system.
Of course.
Press Complaints Commission, that the voluntary system, self-regulation that we started in early 2000. And then the Press Council, the government system. We have both for print now. But if you take the television and broadcast sector, we don't have any.
Absolutely.
And then we came to the social media.
Digital
era. So there are also, entire world is now debating how to regulate social media. So in that context, Sri Lanka took a very bold step a couple of months back. They called Safe Web LK. And that's to self-regulate the social media platforms on Sri Lanka focused content. I think that program is looking at examples from Australia and New Zealand. And New Zealand started yesterday, the self-regulate process.
Excellent.
So the Safe Web is entirely based on that practice. The Sri Lankan partner has signed the contract.
Excellent.
There are multi-stakeholder process.
Nice.
Drafting stage has started. Nalaka Gunawardene is leading the drafting team.
Excellent.
And in 3 months' time, we might have a code of practice.
Excellent.
Code for the social media companies. And Asia Internet Coalition has signed the MOU to make it a pilot for 6 months.
Nice.
So let's see how it go forward. We are trying to get civil society-led initiative.
Excellent.
We can't say regulate, at least to abide by a code.
Exactly.
To some extent.
Excellent.
And the good thing is the 17-member coalition in Singapore agreed to collaborate with Sri Lanka as a case study. So this will be the first country in Asia and also the developing world.
Excellent.
So far, EU, Australia, and New Zealand are practicing this.
Excellent.
So let's see how it goes.
That's very good news. I think there has been more progress in the last few months.
Yes.
Than we have for years.
Exactly. So we wanted government also as a stakeholder, because law enforcement comes in a big way here.
Absolutely.
So we had a meeting yesterday with the President's office, and there is a commitment to help the process, not as a leading partner, but as a stakeholder.
Excellent.
The government has to be a stakeholder.
Absolutely, always. Yes,
Yeah.
and I think that's
So that's the situation of media regulation in Sri Lanka.
excellent.
Just to give one example, a couple of weeks back, Ranil Wickremesinghe made a public complaint that against a particular television channel. That particular channel mobilized people and instigated the issue at his own residence. So Ranil Wickremesinghe made this complaint in public, but there should be a place that he can go and make the complaint and then have a fair hearing. And the channel also, particular channel also might have their own version.
Yes.
So we should have a fair play
Absolutely.
and fair hearing.
Absolutely.
We don't have such place.
Absolutely.
The last effort to bring a media regulatory commission was in 2017. With a draft.
That. Yes.
Mr. Vijayananda Jayavira was leading that.
Right.
And this very particular channel was against that. So now you should feel the vacuum. If we had a place, there could be a fair hearing.
Yeah,
But now you have to go to the court of law.
No, I agree. And from personal experience, I can tell you that when I was there, also something like this similar was happening.
Exactly.
And we had agreement by many parties to be.
Yes.
But then when one or two holds out, then the others get jittery and they don't move on. So that I hope will get to a point where everybody sees value in agreeing.
Yes.
Usually it's one or two holdouts, and they bring
You can't get everyone on board.
Of course.
But at least majority should take it
Exactly.
forward. But the broadcast sector is not willing to do that. They
Exactly.
were having very free hand.
Exactly.
Very free playing field. So now they don't want to get any rules and regulation to this.
Exactly. But I think hopefully society will put that pressure more than even
We
politicians.
have been doing it for the last 25 years.
We'll see. I think what happens usually also with print, and I want to bring Dilrukshi and Bhavani in also is I think what happens is as industry declines, for example, it happened with print, then the power becomes less, right? And then they are more willing to be amiable for anything, really. So I think with Ofcom in the UK as well, I think when television started to become less dominant with digital coming up, I think then we had a situation of where they were more willing to listen, and I think with digital dominating now,
Still, 94% of the population in Sri Lanka
do
still
watch
get their
television.
information through television.
Exactly. So I think so, but I think we'll see. Well, if there is pressure on other fronts, there will be. But I want to come to you, Dilrukshi, because you're still a practitioner in terms of of doing being a journalist. How do you look at the regulatory regime, and do you think that it represents the expectations of society?
I think the media landscape has changed a lot in the past 20 years. And it has changed so much with the digitization process. And, with citizen journalism becoming really the decisive thing today. And if you think about print and television, I think what we call web journalists or citizen journalists have become more powerful. Along with the democratization of the media landscape, you have otherwise you will have all kinds of control. Like you have a owner, and then the owner decides on the media policy of that particular media house. So we have had the opportunity. So I see it as a place where everybody was able to come in and share their viewpoint. But along with that great freedom should come great responsibility.
Absolutely.
And right now we are living through all of that. You look around Sri Lanka and then you realize that there is a real need for different measures. And I definitely stand for self-regulation, and I do think it should not be placed in the hands of a government, because it can be always used against the media industry. But so what is today's media industry?
Exactly.
So it's very fragmented.
Yes.
If you're thinking about the newspaper industry, or if you think about the television, then that's not really where the stories are happening. That's not really where the conversations are happening. So I do think I work with a lot of journalists, all kinds. So now the definition of journalist has also changed, right? And we are eternally trying to see who a journalist is now. And in that, how do we agree to a minimum set of standards? Now, I think this has become really critically important. Going by what Ranga shared, by way of an example, where is the place that anybody can go and complain to? So I also
Absolutely.
don't think. And he also mentioned Australia, New Zealand, and other places. So I've been looking at some of the German models, mostly because of a certain need that we are looking at a media law, study process. And in that, we have looked at more of the German model and the Australian model, where I find it very interesting that, should I be the aggrieved party? Or should I just be the interested consumer? Shouldn't consumers have the opportunity to go and say, I saw some really unacceptable content.
Absolutely.
And I really want to, I really want to complain. I think we have to look at systems where not just the aggrieved party, but also citizens also can contribute. But then this also means you're going to create this huge space and a huge body probably where you will be sifting all these complaints. But it's very necessary that you create that space for individuals, and also because journalists themselves complain. So that's the other thing, Imran. I get to see a lot of journalists say, oh my God, that's really a violation of media ethics. And what makes a model work, I think the collective. We really need to agree. As you both said, I'm sure not everybody is going to accept a set of minimum standard practices, but at least you need to have that. And we must agree that if you're a citizen journalist, and we have gone past that stage of saying you're nothing, a lot of people do say this whole othering process of the people who come from the established media houses. But to say that if you call yourself a journalist, you must agree to some minimum standards.
Absolutely.
And all of our organizations, and even if you're not in that organized sector, you have to agree. You have to publish on your website saying that I agree to these minimum standards. And individually also you have a role to play, not just organizations.
Absolutely. And I can give you an example of when Echelon, this magazine that is associated, started. Shaminder, I was at SLPI, and Shaminder came and met me, and he said, I'm not part of this whole, self-regulatory thing, but I want to give some rights to whoever wants to be in this magazine, right? Whoever is writing to this magazine. So I think Echelon has been a part of the Press Complaints Commission, even though they are not, a traditional newspaper. And that's because the publisher felt there has to be a redress mechanism to be a responsible publication.
Accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
Both.
Absolutely. And I think that's, and also even for influencers, if you see the developed world, I think now you have to declare all financial, requirements. When I put a social media post about, something that I put for the Fintech Down Foundation, they will come and tell me, is it branded content? Is it organic, this thing? So I think it's that responsibility is coming everywhere. Yeah. While we spoke about the regulatory regime, Bhavani, I think we also need to talk about threats. And I think this industry has been under threat for a long time. But I've seen evolution of the way threats are now done. While physical threats, as always, particularly for frontline reporters, it's become much more nuanced, right? The law has been used, manipulated. Laws that were passed, for example, the ICCPR was passed for something else, but is utilized against journalists. A few months back, there was this whole concept of a fake news law that was going to come in as well. So there's a nuanced manner in which the threats to journalists are coming. And I'm not very sure that all media houses and all individual journalists are ready for that. They're maybe now ready for, with all the trainings that we have worked over the years, to give them physical and threats, but not this kind of nuanced threats. How should they be dealing with these?
So thanks, Imran, and this is such a timely conversation considering everything that's happening in Sri Lanka in terms of the political context, but also we're also having this conversation when Sri Lanka is in a state of emergency.
Absolutely.
And that particular emergency now has been used to target and arrest individuals who are posting things on social media. That's not a new trend. So as a lawyer, I differ from Ranga and Dilrukshi in that I bring in the legal and I look at it legally. But it's so important to have clarity in terms of what is possible within the law, what's provided in the law, but also how law can be used to weaponize. And unfortunately, that's what we've been seeing in Sri Lanka in terms of using the existing legal framework to legitimize, to normalize, and to bring in certain, it's kind of a self-censorship when people start being attacked, threatened, arrested. So already now the arrests happened yesterday. Already people are texting and asking, should we post something on social media? Would we get arrested? The fear is there. So one of the things very important with any legal framework, considering what we have and also the conversations in 2021, this report of the cabinet approving the fake news bill came about. But before that also amendments to the penal code, criminal procedure code, existing laws such as the ICCPR Act. So we have existing laws, we have proposed laws, and that's the worry, is what is really can be enforced, what can come through. And this is in a context where laws can come pretty quickly.
Yes, particularly with the big majority in parliament.
Exactly, and people don't know because there's so much going on in Sri Lanka that this could happen. So with the fake news proposal in 2021, there's this like, what's going to happen, what's in the law. So one of the things we need to understand is what is provided in the framework, what is going to be proposed, how it's going to be used. And this implementation is critical because we have quite a bit of laws from, I mentioned penal code, criminal procedure code, PTA, unfortunately,
Yes. Still
PTA
there.
has been
Still
used
there.
to arrest and prosecute and convict journalists. You know, we've had this in the past, like Thisanagam, who for his writing was convicted. We have ICCPR, which has been used in the recent past, even as recent as 2020, 2021, to target journalists. So the worry is how a law could be used, how the law could be used for political purposes, and how new things, new regulations such as the emergency regulations or regulations under the PTA that also could be brought in overnight without anyone realizing. So there is a worry with the legal framework, how it can be used and how it can restrict media, but also freedom of expression, and has a direct impact on democracy. This is what we don't realize. What's happening in Sri Lanka now is the space is opened up. We may not like some of the developments politically and otherwise, but the space is open up for us to critique because of our democracy. But if you start bringing in new laws and regulations, if you start targeting individuals for opinions they hold, then we are going into a very scary, very scary situation.
But having said that, I fully agree with Bhavani in that context, because we have enough laws. We don't need new laws. We have enough. If somebody wants to look into the fake news or disinformation matters, there are enough legal framework in the country. But irony of it is, the real disinformation, real fake news disseminated by the mainstream are not looked at through these illegal lens. One example is Safi case. If you look at the Safi case, who was the perpetrator? It's not social media. The main perpetrator was mainstream media. A print, I don't mind saying Divaina, and then continued by television stations. How much of air time they used to propagate the Safi case. But today, we know what has happened to Safi. So this is entirely focused, targeted, doctored narrative that with a political purpose. So where is ICCPR now?
Absolutely.
It's about how it's weaponized, how it's
That's
used.
my point. That's my point. So don't blame at social media itself. The problem here is the mainstream. Politicized, weaponized mainstream. Vanda Kottu, Vanda Jangi, Safi, Nai, Dhammika Penny.
And that is a actual direct health
list is long.
impact. Yes.
The list is long. So where is the... So that's exactly why we need... And today, Imran, if you look at the context, we need proper regulation today more than yesterday.
Yes.
Because we are in a massive crisis.
Yes.
We need crisis-sensitive journalism in this country. You don't need voice-cut journalism.
Absolutely.
And we need now, if you take regulatory mechanisms like Indonesia, they are very much hands-on. One of the best regulatory system in this part of the world, Indonesian model. And they are very much part of the system. when there's a crisis like this, they intervene. They are not waiting for complaints to come onto their table.
Absolutely.
So we need robust systems to face calamities like this, to reshape the mindset of the people. But where is our system? So we are in a massive vacuum. And also, I don't say we are too late, but we have to get our acts together, especially on mainstream.
Because they still have the bigger,
television.
because
They don't
big
have.
impact.
Still, our stations are, opinion driven. Opinion of not the people, opinion of the owner. That is the problem.
Interesting. We want to come to a section that has been discussed quite a lot in recent times, that we just touched upon when we started, and that is the online space, right? For some of the bigger social media giants, the only law that matters is the law in the state of California, but not anywhere else. But their impact in terms of, as you can see, their own internal reports, whether it's Facebook about election violence and other stuff in Sri Lanka. The impact is huge and global. How do we get them? I think you started off, Ranga, by talking about the kind of initiatives in this part of the world. But now yesterday I was checking Colombo Telegraph, who in those Facebook account has been suspended for giving an opinion that it's really, in a country where he lives, in a country where freedom of thought is very high. So, it's fascinating how much power a handful of companies have versus the individual and the journalists. So how do we? Now,
you when we were having the chat before this, you mentioned about Marcos. So if you analyze the campaign of Marcos, it's very clear he started in 2012.
Yes.
With a massive army of social media content providers. And his target was that time age 10 to 40, who now have become the voters in Philippines, and who don't read, who don't care about the history of the country. They are only
emotion driven.
Z generation or Z plus generation or whoever, only on the touch screen. So he carefully targeted that, and from a campaign point of view, fantastic, successful campaign. After Marcos was elected, 4 days after the election, I was in Jakarta that time. So all the fact checkers and social media monitors got together and created a platform to start some program how not to get Suharto re-elected. So we are also having same problem here. How not to get someone re-elected after 10-15 years.
Absolutely. And I think that's a challenge across South Asia as well, right?
Yes.
And Africa and different parts of the world as well. Dilrukshi, you've dealt with this in a different light as well. You're on the training arm of working with the journalists. You have concerns about, the distinction between influencers and journalists.
I want to add to what Ranga said. So the fact that some of the social media companies are extremely powerful and extremely influential, and they can get information and misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and propaganda faster and better is a given. So in a situation like that, but there are other case studies from different countries. Right? You're right. It's not just the law that is applicable to California that stands, right? It should not be so. Because I think it opens up a new space, again, a new conversation as to how do we respond. So if you look at the market share, the market size of some countries, big markets, and then they will also have to be probably in certain markets. But Sri Lanka is not that. Certain social media companies don't necessarily want to even get into this market, and that we know. So in such a situation, their influence and the ways in which they can influence is also really high. Absolutely. In a place like ours. But we should look to other countries, and there are many examples already emerging, particularly after the New Zealand incidents. And since then, there have been new trends where you do find the domestic application of it, right?
Yeah,
so
the
there are-
self-regulation started
that's
after
right,
the
that's
Christchurch
right.
attack.
So there is
Yes.
exactly. So
Yeah.
there is a response to that.
Yeah.
They do say, you cannot weaponize your platform, and then there will be a fine. There will be, the government, not necessarily the government, but there will be independent bodies. Now that's where we differ, right? Sri Lanka doesn't have the kind of independent bodies that we would like to have, and if we had those, then they are able to say there is a takedown regime. You could respond. We don't have to wait for weeks and weeks for some post to come down and appeal and wait, so that a certain video has to be taken down. But there is a time frame, 24 hours, and then there are sanctions within that country, right? Using that independent body. I think there have been too many examples since then, and many countries, right? So I think we need to look at those, and because it's also a new situation and it's an evolving situation, we have to respond, learning from some of the better democracies, and more where you also have more independent bodies where people can actually issue even censor notes first. And then you can actually say we are fining you, and you have to have that. Otherwise, the kind of violence it can drive can be really, really destructive.
Absolutely. Bhavani, I want to come to you, and there is this perennial, when it comes to regulation, there is this perennial tension between self-regulatory and then state regulation, or whether you should have a mix of the two, right? Some countries, particularly in Europe, have decided to go down the self-regulatory route, but then they found, particularly in recent times, the kind of access to justice for individuals who've been, in their view, wronged is not as robust as they thought it would be. So how do you resolve this tension?
It's a tough one, Imran, but I think we need to also look at Sri Lanka's context. No? I mean, I would also personally say self-regulation would be ideal, because we've had such bad experiences when the state overreaches. In Sri Lanka, there is a history of overreach by successive governments. It's not just one. And we see even the most liberal or democratic government, I don't need to name names, will try to impose things. I mean, for example, Yahapalana, which came with all these promises of freedom and democracy, one of the first things they did, I'm sure Ranga and Dilrukshi will remember, is in 2015 when they tried to bring an amendment to the penal code. And that's something actually we went to court and challenged, and the government then withdrew. So even the most liberal of governments may come into office and they may have to settle for certain things, make compromises, and then you wonder, what does state regulation mean? And in terms of also institutions, we have a huge problem in terms of institutions being so politicized, vindictive, not having, listening to both Ranga and Dilrukshi, one of the biggest problems we have is not having due process in terms of even an investigation.
Absolutely.
Is just that one can complain, and then where does the other even get heard? Is it fair? Is it transparent? Is it accountable? So it's very problematic in terms of state regulation within the Sri Lankan context. In terms of self-regulation, again, there has to be awareness in terms of the actors as to why it's important. There has to be responsibility. So even in terms of entities, there has to be responsibility to take reporting seriously, to fact check. This is a big problem in Sri Lanka, the fake news that comes from different actors.
Yes, exactly.
So self-regulation also comes with responsibility. So what is the best model for Sri Lanka is something we all need to think about and look at and explore what's possible. The worry, though, is a thin line of freedoms, liberty, and then also protecting the rights and having that system. So I'm not saying there is this great model, but it's something we all have to strive for. Ensuring, though, that there is a process that people can also reach to in terms of if there is a wrong, have that due process standards, all of that. So no answer in terms of this is the best formula, but fine-tuning it and finding our own way is important.
I can add to Bhavani, and I can give some kind of a
context as well.
Very strong answer to that. Because from being both sides, once I was promoting self-regulation for about 8-10 years with the Press Complaints Commission and strong advocate of self-regulation. And then I went to government. And ex officio, I was member of the Press Council, though I did not attend any meeting. In writing, giving my objection to Press Council. But I was a member.
Right.
Taking note of what Bhavani said, of course, Sri Lanka, in the context of Sri Lanka, now we have both. We have self-regulation and state. Both systems are running, but
that's only in
you
print.
take. Sorry, only on that's right. But if you take the context of and cultural environment of this region, again I am going back to the Indonesian model, which is a co-regulatory. So it's a mix of both.
Nice.
Self plus state. And it's so far working perfect. And it's a role model for the region. Now, why self-regulation failed in Sri Lanka? I'm using the word failed because I'm getting again the same example of Safi. Now, Safi's story, who broke the story? The very same member of the Press Complaints Commission.
Yes.
So the promoters of self-regulation, that's fine. You broke a story, but at some point of time it proved to be wrong.
Yes.
Then where is your responsibility and accountability to say so sorry?
Absolutely.
We are all human beings, no? We are not journalists coming from the heaven. We do make mistakes, so we say sorry. Never we heard apologizing on this story. It's such a massive story that created massive waves within our society, political society and social waves. Where have we heard any apology from the media?
Agreed.
Nothing.
Agreed. I think enforcement, even within a self-regulatory body, is very important. And,
Yeah, even Imran, both of you and I were there. So what can we do? When our own member is violating the very same code that they are to protect it.
Absolutely.
What are we going to do?
Absolutely.
Because it's a voluntary system.
Absolutely.
So are we mature enough to get this norms and standard onto our table and practice them? I don't think so.
So there should be a
So we are not
mechanism
mature,
not to
basically.
fly.
No, I don't think. I mean, we are a mature society. That's why even when we propose Safe Web LK, the process to Asia Internet Coalition, as Dilrukshi said, Sri Lanka is not a massive market. Very small market. Facebook even threatened to withdraw from Pakistan when they brought laws. They said, okay, you take your laws, you keep it, you bring your laws, we will go. What can we do? We earn about $1.8 million a month for businesses in Sri Lanka through Facebook only. Massive amount of money to Sri Lanka. So we can't afford to get social media out of our landscape. But when we proposed self-regulatory mechanism for AIC, for social media companies, they agreed. Being a very small market. Why? We are mature enough. We are a learned society. We can become a role model in the region. Unfortunately, some of our decision makers are not.
I was going to say the political leadership is lacking. So there's a few missing pieces.
True.
But we'll get there.
We all travel a lot. What is the first question we get from our friends abroad? How come it happened to Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka, yes. Yes.
How come? There's such a huge literate society, intellectual society. How come it happened to Sri Lanka? It's not our fault.
Never.
Dilrukshi, one thing that I've noticed is that we used to look to global best practices. Europe, not much in the US, but Europe really, UK, and we used to kind of start model based on them, at least in the 80s, and we started doing that a little bit, and then I think the war ended, and then I think our interactions with the world became clouded in international conspiracy, national security. So how do we go back and engage with the world? I think we've really not really engaged in the last 15 years. We used to collaborate so much with the international bodies for others, Sweden, in US bodies a little bit in terms of technology. Scandinavian countries, big players who used to be with us, very close with us. How do we re-engage with those people?
Very interesting, Imran, because the reference point is also the war and what we have learned from that, right? And along with that, I think we have this highly polarized, our people are really polarized in terms of, all kinds, right? Ethnic, religious, and even opinions. And we don't even show enough respect for each other, and we don't have that minimum tolerance for the other. So what happened?
You can see in the petrol.
That's right. So when you see when you see the industry evolving, how did we evolve? We went to that, like he was talking about the mainstream. So what was the mainstream response? Because mainstream was powerful at that time.
Yes.
Immediately,
Yes.
In the aftermath
Of course.
of the war.
And it made politicians.
That's right. And then what were we doing? We just said like, okay, so this is the way in which we are going to respond. There are narratives. We are all creating dominant narratives, or either the dominant narrative or all kinds of narratives that are either linked to our owners or to our political interests or to our business interests, multiple other interests, right? So it's not a bad thing, people, as long as you declare. And these narratives have come to stay. We are still, when he gives that Shafi example, we are still stuck with that old narrative, which we have still not been able to break free from. It's just that the ethnicity has changed.
Yes.
Yeah. So we are still thinking about how would a majority community maintain and foster that particular narrative in the interest of the state for national security. So to answer your question, I really don't have an answer, but I think these are like many things that we discuss. These are processes and these are evolving conversations. But the current crisis, the many issues we discussed today, does open up a space where we see a lot of problems and we are able to identify them. And we also were talking about better examples elsewhere. So we have had this process and then we have abandoned it. And I think from crisis to crisis, the media cannot be responding. When I say media, it's in the broadest sense, right? I no longer talk about mainstream or anything else, everybody. So we have to look to those best studies, and they do exist, as Ranga said, within the region. Look no further.
Yes,
India has it.
Yes, absolutely.
India has it. When you think about the national broadcaster here, and when you think about the Indian broadcaster, despite all the criticisms we do have about who's ruling India, right? And there is a semblance of decency and a certain plural approach where you can still have a conversation and bring other people who do not agree with your viewpoint. And we need to look towards those examples. And best thing is to learn first from the region because it's easy to replicate and more relevant culturally and otherwise probably, better suited. And then what we have already nurtured this kind of, both of you, right? When we had these discussions, some time back. Why do we abandon a body of work, body of knowledge, and things that you put forward and, initiated? And right now, this crisis, I think crisis also comes with opportunity. And the opportunity is to address the crisis, the multiple crises that we are driving. And the best examples that all of you have been working on to be brought to one place. And we need to evolve a model that is acceptable to people. I think everybody is echoing the thing that, our systems are not robust and we can't place enough, public won't place enough trust. But we need to create that model. If it is, something that comes from self-regulation and, government, state-initiated regulation, whether it's a mix or not. But I think it's time for new models to emerge.
Because democracy is about institutions.
Absolutely.
Strong, robust, independent institutions.
Absolutely.
So in 2015, we were talking about institutions, but media was forgotten.
Absolutely.
Not really forgotten.
Yeah.
And I was appointed to do two tasks. One was implementation of RTI and then bringing this commission.
Of course.
But unfortunately, that commission bill was brought in at the last leg of the government.
Yes.
So no government want to bring unpopular piece of legislation at the last leg. So then it was kept aside. So then I thought, thank you, I will say adios. But the thing is, if you look at the institutions, Dil was talking about neighbors. The Pakistani model, Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, PEMRA, maybe not the best one, but it's very strong code of conduct. Very strong. I remember during the Lahore attack, there is a very strong, in this strong code, there is a very clear instruction not to show dead bodies.
Right.
In a country like Pakistan, okay, imagine suicide bombing and all this. So there is a close. But 3 stations broke this because they were in a competition.
Right.
This competition, breaking news. So live footages carried some. All 3 stations. One station has to pay 3 million fine.
Right.
2 stations went 48 hours off air.
Wow.
So that's the, but nobody shouted, this is violation of freedom of expression, media. No. Sorry. This is the law.
Right.
And the organization doing it, right?
Exactly.
The body that
PEMRA.
is- exactly.
It's an independent
that-
organization.
Exactly.
So that we need these independent institutions. What is media? It's the 4th pillar of democracy, and we need them to reshape the minds of the people.
True. And also to keep the other 3 in check.
Exactly. And they are how can we correct the society?
Exactly. So just coming to you again, Ranga, I think one of the reasons why we have not been able to create strong institutions, at least from a self-regulated body, is that the unique structure of the ownership of media in Sri Lanka. Sadly, at least from electronic perspective, it's just a handful of businessmen who have no pedigree and real interest in creating a professionalized media. Right? It's about propagating their business interests or person. But that is the reality now we deal with. How are we to, work with this to make sure that we get some sort of, responsible authority?
About 4 or 5 years back, I used to say this country is not governed by the president or the prime minister, but 4 businessmen who have the dictatorship or the airwaves of the public. So they create the mindset and they create the public perception. And now we have to add one more foreigner, Mr. Zuckerberg, to that list. Now they dictate the mindset of the people, opinion of the people. So this is a challenge. As you very correctly said, I don't think any country has a system to regulate the ownership and also.
I think Australia has a little bit very
in
the past.
I'm talking about our developing world.
Yes.
Or Asian context,
Yes,
we don't have a system where we monitor the owner
Yes.
when we distribute the frequencies.
Licenses. Frequencies. Yes.
That's a major mistake because I'll tell you one example. When Myanmar was thriving for democracy in 2016, they decided to open up the spectrum for the private sector and they called for bidders. So there were 50 bidders, but if you want to invest in the television sector, the calculation was $200,000 bleeding per month for a period of 3 years.
Right.
So that's the investment you have to do, bleeding, not profit. You have to bleed for 3 years at the rate of $200,000 a month. So who has that kind of money? Who has that money? Still, Myanmar Ministry of Information received 50 applications. So interesting enough, we did a small vetting of these applicants. Who are they? Former generals, cronies. So if you don't give them license, there is no industry. So this is a catch-22 situation. You can vet the owners, but if you vet the owners,
You will have no industry.
who will invest?
Yeah.
So that's why we say the ownership. If you analyze the ownership structure of the televisions, basically in this part of the world, there's a very interesting category of 5% who wants to convert black money into white money. They have about 5 to 10% of the entire industry. The economic interest is about 30%. Then you have about political interest about another 30%. Then you have find another 10% missing. Who are they? But their interest is no politics, no economic, but to convert black money into white money. The drug money, the mafia money, or you call it whatever. So, but they are the people who invest a lot, pay a lot, and do good productions, and make a good industry. And why they invest on media? Because they're the safest. Nobody will touch you, number one. Number two, you become the kingmaker.
Interesting.
So they invest on media. Very strategic.
Interesting.
And we are talking about 4th pillar of democracy.
And no country has really solved this one, right?
No.
this
You
is
go to
also-
India, you go to Bangladesh, you go to Pakistan. The fantastic example is Pakistani ball media 5 years back. They cut the legs of all other media and gave V8s to the editors, and and then one company went to courts. They asked the Karachi court to investigate the money. Where is the money coming from? All mafia money. So they have to stop the media house. At least Pakistani court had that guts to stop the media.
Are you suggesting that we should investigate the media industry itself?
Well, we at least have a media ownership monitor that reveals the political allegiance. But even if you take Sri Lankan media industry, you find a lot of black money circulating in the industry. It's not nothing new. You go to Thailand, how much of drug money is circulating in the media industry?
Interesting.
And we are talking about freedom of expression.
Interesting.
And fourth pillar of democracy.
Interesting. I think the only real solution, and we're out of time, so I would, before I conclude, I just want to think the only hope we have.
Imran, regulation should consider those.
Absolutely. I think more than media regulation, I think financial services regulation should look at it.
Absolutely.
I think they are the ones, that's where you really catch them,
yeah.
right? And accountability versus media. I think it's not really a media issue, it's a banking and financial services, because this money is going through some system, right, before it gets to things.
We had a media owner, when he summoned the editorial meeting, I don't want to say even the stream, he put his pistol on his table and then he talked to the journalists.
It's fascinating insights, fascinating. But I think the hope, at least what I've seen from around the world is in technology and in digital. Where this issue of free spectrum is not as much of an issue now, because you can give licenses to 500 people. Of course, production cost is a problem, but that's also declining very fast. So I hope that technology becomes our savior if we know how to use it responsibly. We're out of time, but it was I think one of the most fascinating discussions of our entire series, and I think our viewers will truly enjoy it. And I think hopefully get insights into the kind of fourth pillar of society that's supposed to take care of the other three, and what we need
Hold
to
them accountable.
Hold them accountable, and
Fourth pillar of the value systems, no?
Exactly. And what we need to do in terms of rescuing our democracy is to look at all four pillars and try to reform all four of them as well. So on behalf of the Feeding Now One Foundation for Freedom, Sri Lanka Office, and EconomyNext, thank you to Ranga, Dilrukshi, and Bhavani, and please join us for another episode of this very soon. Thank you.